Welcome to the University of Michigan Dentistry Podcast Series, promoting oral health care worldwide.
In the edentulous patient, it is necessary to determine how close the jaws should be to each other when the patient's teeth are together, when the dentures are together. Now, as in the mannequin, there is no third point of reference holding the jaws apart. This has to be determined. Is the patient overclosed with an old set of dentures, say? Is the patient at about the right vertical? Or has a set of dentures been made for the patient that holds his jaws too far apart? We have to determine the correct occlusal vertical dimension. Now, as just mentioned in the lecture and in your handouts that have been given to you, this is the unknown, the occlusal vertical dimension. We have a method of determining the postural rest position. We mark the face, we have the patient sitting upright in the chair, and we take a measurement of the patient's jaws when they are in postural rest position. Now, interocclusal distance, we can make a guess. He has to have some. We cannot encroach upon the freeway space. We have to have some. So let's give the patient 3 or 4 millimeters. So what we have to do is make a measurement here, subtract a few millimeters, and come up with the dimension of the face when the bite rims or the actual dentures are in contact. This establishes the vertical dimension of the patient's face. The first thing that we do clinically, and the first thing we will do in this course, is to make and establish a bite rim, an occlusal wax bite rim, on the lower base plate. Now, this has already been completed up to a point when you made the base plates in the last exercise. The first thing we do when we go to the patient, and the first thing you will do here, is to refine the configuration, if need be, of the wax rim. Now, what we're looking for, of course, is that the rim is parallel when the unit is on the table, in this case. Okay? Set the instrument on the table and sight both directions. Sight in from the anterior region and sight across laterally, and adapt or make any changes necessary so that the entire surface is parallel. Now, another thing we have to look at is the height. And before, remember, as a guideline, we come about halfway down the retromolar pad and establish that as the height. Now, I've actually made a mark on the mannequin showing where I wanted the height of the rim. The other things to remember, and this will be checked by the instructors because it becomes important, even more than the impression stage, it becomes important now. We're a little wider in the posterior region, over the ridge. Don't get too far out to the buccal or to the lingual. As we come forward, it narrows to represent the incisor teeth. And routinely, as in most cases in the natural dentition, the anterior is labially oriented. The wax rim is not directly over the top of the ridge, but is labially oriented. So the first step, without reviewing or without demonstrating, we've done this enough by now, is to establish the wax occlusal bite rim on the lower. Now, this is hard. This is finished. This is not softened again in the procedure. Now, in establishing the measurements that we talked about before, in this course, I have to give you measurements because we have no patient to measure. We have no patient to put into physiologic or postural rest position and so forth. So I'm going to give you some measurements so everybody will have the same mounting when we finish the establishment of vertical and centric. Now, I have here a ruler that I have cut, so I've taken extra words off, and it makes it easier to read. It's a millimeter rule. Do not use the inch rule. Just a plastic millimeter rule. and have drawn a line, around 105, which I'm calling postural position. In other words, from the top of the articulator, and I want you all to measure from the same point on your instrument, from the top of the articulator, flush with the top, to this area on the, I'll point this out again in a minute so we're all on the same boat. On the bottom rim of the articulator, or really we should call this the patient, 105 millimeters we would say would be, say, postural position. At this time, the patient, let me show you a different example of this. At this time, the patient would be in postural position. That is, he is upright in the chair, his jaw is relaxed, he's comfortable, his lips are probably very comfortably together. From that position, we're going to close 3 or 4 millimeters, just arbitrarily, and establish the vertical occlusal position there. We don't want the teeth to come together when the patient is in the postural position. Now, let me go over those measuring points so everybody has the correct place. We measure from the top of the top plate of your Visiodont. From there, we measure straight down to the lower rim of the bottom plate of the Visiodont. And you'll see that a couple more times, so we make sure everybody measures from the correct place. So once again, now I have cut the top of the measuring device off at 0. That makes it easy just by placing my finger at the top, making it flush with the finger to register the 0. And then as I close the patient together, I go through postural position at the bottom, the mark that I've made PP. You don't need to mark your measuring device for that. But as I go through, I'm going to close down until I reach a measurement of 101 millimeters. And because all these mountings are identical, we will consider the patient's vertical dimension at 101 millimeters for this case. So everybody's tooth setup will be the same. We'll all have the same space to set teeth, and it makes a more efficient teaching procedure. So the number to remember is the patient's jaws are held at a vertical of 101 millimeters. Now, the next step then in actually determining the vertical measurement of the patient's face when the future teeth are in contact, now that we have established the lower bite rim as we want. Now, in the mouth, we use different criteria for this. For instance, the corners of the lips is a guideline. The wax rim is no higher than the corners of the mouth. If the wax rim is higher at about the right vertical, we know the lower rim is too high. It's kind of difficult to be too low, but it's easy to be too high. So we have some different criteria that will be talked about in future courses. Next semester, Dr. Schwartz will talk about this. But for this course, we will use these arbitrary measurements that are given you and have been reviewed. Now, the next step, and remember when we made the base plates, it was pointed out that you did not adapt a wax occlusal rim to the maxillary base plate, because this will be done at this time. The next step is to place a soft rim of wax on the upper. We place it back into the mouth, and then we guide the patient closed, all the time measuring, and the patient is guided closed, and he actually closes into the soft wax on the upper. The lower is hard, remember. And then we have the patient stop when we reach the desired measurement of 101 millimeters. Okay, let's demonstrate that now. This is exactly what you will be doing in a few moments in the laboratory. Now, as mentioned before, you can use either hot water or you can use a flame to soften the wax. I'm going to use flame. And for this size of a master cast, I suggest that all you need is about 2/3 of a sheet of wax. If you use a sheet, or some of you are using 2 sheets of wax, it is too much wax. You really don't need that much. So at this time, I'm going to heat up about 2/3 of a sheet of wax. And the trick here, of course, is to have the whole mass of wax thoroughly warmed, so when you bite into it, the patient comes into it with a lower bite rim, they don't have any trouble getting down to the proper vertical. If the wax gives too much resistance, we have a lot of distortion of tissues in the mouth, and this gives us faulty recordings, both in vertical registration and in centric registration. Now just about one more fold, and you see I keep heating the wax. I want the whole mass to remain soft. And at this point, we have enough for a roll. I'm going to take a little bit off. I don't want the full sheet of wax. It's not necessary. And complete the heating of the wax mass. Okay, we don't need that for a moment. Now, on this base plate that you have made, we will adapt a soft mass of wax. Now, I think worth pointing out to you here that you don't have to bring this roll all the way back to the end of the base plate. It's not necessary. A centimeter in is fine. Okay, now why that is still, now you notice I put some sticky wax on to make adhesion a little more efficient. The next thing that we do while it's still soft, we go to the patient's mouth. The lower is already in place. We place the upper base plate into the mouth, and we have the patient come together with the jaw back until it hits the wax. And then we give the patient instruction while we are measuring to put some biting pressure into the wax. Now, right there we are about at the postural position. We have some more to go. So we're going to continue to bite together until our measurement, as mentioned before, reaches 101 millimeters. At that time, we stop, and we tell the patient, stop. That's the occlusal vertical dimension that we want to work with in making this denture. At this time, we wait maybe a moment or two, but not too long, because we want the wax to separate. We have the patient open. Sometimes, as in the mouth, these come off together. If that happens, that's all right. But now what you can see has happened here is we have keyed in the upper base plate by using the lower cold or solid hard base plate, occlusal rim, the approximate configuration that we want to have these two wax rims come together properly. At this time, it is suggested that you seal a little better the wax occlusal rim to the base plate. So simply with a hot spatula, go around and seal the wax. Now the next step is to work on the configuration of the wax bite rim. And the first thing we do there is remove the excess wax down to the plane that we've established with the lower bite rim. And to do that, we can simply use the blade that you have, heat it up, and very carefully, don't take it too far, very carefully, using the established plane as a guide, remove any excess wax in that manner. But we have some more adjusting to do. One of the things is that we've moved excess wax into the tongue space, so let's remove some of that. So with a hot blade or warm blade on the buffalo knife, don't use the scalpel for this, it doesn't retain heat long enough. Let's remove some of that excess wax, because we're going to be doing more in the mouth with these bite rims, and we want the patient's tongue, we don't want the patient's tongue restricted. That gives us false movements of the jaws. And then we can dress up the posterior section a little bit. And one of the most important areas, and we'll talk about this a bit later, is the relationship of the anterior part of the wax rim to the anterior part of the base plate. When people start out working with complete dentures, it's a common thought, and a logical one, I guess, that the teeth came out of the middle of the maxillary ridge. Well, they did not. They were labial to the maxillary ridge. And we should show this at this time in the wax rim. Actually, in the patient, some extra time is spent in actually contouring the anterior part of the wax so that it gives us a guide when we start setting teeth. That is, we know the labial inclination that we want to give the teeth that give the proper support to the patient's lip. So actually, in the clinical case, we would be doing this at chairside, going back and forth, contouring this until the lip support is desirable to the patient and to you. Now, looking down on the tissue surface of the base plate, you really shouldn't see any wax extending over the periphery. If that is the case, you're probably a little too wide. Now, I'm not going to continue this at this time because I have one made up that we can continue with the tape. I just wanted to point out the contouring of the anterior portion. Now, you'll notice that the first time you do this, you will probably not have enough wax in this area. Well, this can be added either by flowing it or by adding some small strips, because when you finish, this area should be smooth. We should not have a ledge in there. You can see that I just made an initial movement to fill that in, and then we can take a spatula and blend everything together. We'll take another look at this labial inclination of the wax rim in a couple of moments. So this does take a little work. It's not simple, it's not easy, it's not too fast. So be patient and work with these bite rims until we come up with a desirable final product, which I can show at this time. Now, I have made ahead of time a wax rim, upper wax rim, that you should end up with. And once I place this back into the mouth or onto the mannequin and close the mouth, you can see that the wax touches evenly all the way around, and this is what you should end up with. Now, on the buccal surfaces, the wax will come about end to end. But in the anterior portion, you'll notice that there is a slight horizontal overlapping of the maxillary occlusal rim. And this is normal. This is what our teeth will look like when we finish also. Now, just to review what we've done here with the vertical, when this patient is sitting in the chair upright and his jaw is relaxed and only the anti-gravity muscles or muscle tonus is acting against gravity, and the patient's lips are probably comfortably together, there is probably a space, hopefully, and there must be, a freeway space or interocclusal distance. And then when the patient bites together, he comes down that last 2, 3, or 4 millimeters and contacts. And this is the future contact of the teeth. At this time, let's take another look at this upper rim. So this is a little more difficult to contour. Now you'll notice again that the anterior portion is labially inclined. And this is a guide to setting our teeth. I have here a denture that was made clinically, and you can see this same anterior labial inclination. Okay, I have also a model, actually it's an immediate denture master cast, where we're looking at natural teeth and in connection with the partially dentulous ridge, and you can see the same configuration. Okay, so that should give you an idea of why we have this wax posed labially. And again, it's different with every patient, and the inclination is actually formed in the mouth until we are sure that the lip support is what we want. The way the teeth will eventually support the lip. At this point, we have determined the patient's occlusal vertical dimension. And everybody in the class at this point, when the instructor checks this step, he will check to see that the mannequin is apart by 101 millimeters, and that the wax rim contacts all the way around, and you have the proper configuration of your bite rims. At this time, vertical occlusal dimension of the patient has been established, and then we go on to the next step of transferring these relationships to the articulator, both vertical and horizontal or centric relation.
You've been listening to a presentation from the University of Michigan School of Dentistry, which is dedicated to supporting open learning and open educational resources. This recording is licensed under the Creative Commons. It may be reused and redistributed for nonprofit use. Please attribute materials to the University of Michigan School of Dentistry and redistribute under this same license. For more information on how this and other University of Michigan School of Dentistry recordings may be used, visit www.dent.umich.edu/license.